There were creatures who were a mishmash of a bunch of different xenogenics, and all I was thinking when I was reading some of their descriptions was, dang, talk about a world you do not want to transmigrate into. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Ope and I love talking about things I love and enjoy. One of those things is books in multiple and a variety of genres, but for this video specifically, I'll be reviewing and recommending a short danmei series titled Little Mushroom. If you're unfamiliar with the term, it is a genre of Chinese literature that usually focuses on romantic relationships between male characters, so it's pretty much the Chinese version of BL. Little Mushroom is a web novel by 𝓁𝓉'𝓈 that was picked up to be published under Peach Flower House in 2022. And all the danmei series that have been picked up by this publisher have been pretty short. They usually have about 1 to 3 books in them, or at least that's what they've been like so far. And I love them for that reason. They're a really great way to test out the genre if you're new to it, or just for a quick read if you want something short and sweet. This is a dystopian science fiction series with just 2 books. The series garnered awards in Chinese science fiction. It won a silver award at the 2021 Chinese Nebula Awards and the Xingyun Awards for Global Chinese Science Fiction in the Best Original Novel category as well. So all of those accolades are already enough to convince you that you're in for a good read, but I will of course talk about it some more. And I'll start off with a summary of the series by going over the synopsis at the back of the first book. Until the day humanity falls. In the year 2020, Earth's magnetic poles disappeared and humankind was nearly wiped out by cosmic radiation. Within the span of 100 years, living creatures began to mutate and devour each other while the remaining humans, numbering in the tens of thousands, struggled bitterly in their man-made bases. In the abyss, home to the mutated xenogenics, there lived a sentient little mushroom. Because it had been nourished by the blood and flesh of the deceased human 𝒻𝓇𝒾𝑒𝓃𝒹𝓈, not only did it take on a similar-looking human form, but a similar name as well, 𝒻𝓇𝒾𝑒𝓃𝒹𝓈. 𝒻𝓇𝒾𝑒𝓃𝒹𝓈 is determined to go to the human base to search for his spore, which had been harvested by humans. Once there, however, he faces the omnipresent risk of discovery and certain death as he tries to keep his non-human nature hidden from the judges, whose responsibility it is to inspect for and eliminate xenogenics like himself. And of all the judges, Colonel Liu Feng is the most perceptive and merciless. As soon as he determines that someone is a xenogenic, he will execute that person on the spot. But 𝒻𝓇𝒾𝑒𝓃𝒹𝓈's mutation goes undetected by Liu Feng's eyes, and so a tale of humans and xenogenics unfolds. So the world this story is set in is one that is plagued with mutations that are fatal to humans, and as a result, humans that haven't been infected created man-made bases to prevent contact with mutated xenogenics. These xenogenics reside in a place called the Abyss, and humans do venture out there occasionally for a myriad of reasons, either to study those xenogenics in order to easily detect an infection or mutation, or to collect samples of the xenogenics, and some other reasons that were mentioned in both books. And it was one of these expeditions out into the Abyss that led to the death of the human being 𝒻𝓇𝒾𝑒𝓃𝒹𝓈, who nourished the sentient mushroom that became the main character, 𝒻𝓇𝒾𝑒𝓃𝒹𝓈. It is very important to note the difference between both names. It's just one letter, but there are parts of the story where you need to be able to differentiate between the 2 names. The human who died is 𝒻𝓇𝒾𝑒𝓃𝒹𝓈, and the little mushroom, who is the main character and took on his human form, is 𝒻𝓇𝒾𝑒𝓃𝒹𝓈. 𝒻𝓇𝒾𝑒𝓃 is literally a mushroom, and the premise of him going to the human base to search for his spore and then falling in love with someone, since this is a danmei, sounds like a setup for a cute and fluffy story, but do not be deceived. This is a dystopian science fiction and a story about survival in a post-apocalyptic world. Are there cute and endearing moments in the series? Yes, but they are not the focus of the story. So to continue my summary, I'll make use of the very beautifully drawn ongoing manhwa adaptation of the series. There was some drama surrounding the manhwa that I'll discuss at the end of the video, but continuing with the summary. The story starts out in the Abyss where the human 𝒻𝓇𝒾𝑒𝓃𝒹𝓈 is near death, and next to him is the sentient mushroom that eventually took on his human form after being nourished by 𝒻𝓇𝒾𝓄's flesh and blood. The mushroom was trying to save 𝒻𝓇𝒾𝓄 and was instead adapting to the DNA that he had absorbed from being near 𝒻𝓇𝒾𝓄 due to the high pollution index of the area, which just means mutation happens extremely fast in this area. Anza knows he's not going to make it, so he tells the mushroom to feast on his body after he dies. He also hands over his ID verification, which is the only way for humans to enter the human base. Anja, the mushroom, needs to retrieve his spore from the human base. His spore was one of the samples that happened to be collected for research, but it's also a very vital portion of a mushroom's life, so he needs to get it back. But the human, Anza, tries to warn him against doing so because only humans can enter the human base. The reason for that are these people known as judges who can differentiate between humans and xenogenics, and it's on site if they detect any hint of an infection. You are dead. The mushroom, Anja, figures he doesn't have much to lose by trying to get into the human base. The worst thing that can happen is that he dies, which to him is not a worse fate than having to live without his spore, so he leaves the abyss. He makes it to the human base, and there he faces the moment of truth where everyone who is returning to the base has to undergo a trial to make sure they're human before they can be allowed into the base. This is where he meets the judge and his love interest in the series, Lu Feng, who had been given the moniker of the Arbiter. Lu Feng was different from all the other judges. His decisions were absolute and never called into question, hence the moniker he went by. But when Anja got to the front of the trial line, instead of being shot or given the go-ahead to enter the base, he was taken to the trial court for a genetic test, which is more accurate than trying to identify an infection by sight alone. Things are not looking too good for Anja, but he somehow passes the genetic test and is able to enter the human base. The rest of the book follows Anja as he tries to adapt to life in the base while gathering information on the location of his spore, and thus begins this tale of humanity trying to survive in very bleak conditions. I thought I knew what I was getting into when I decided to read this series, or at least I knew it wasn't going to be a cute fluffy read because of the dystopian science fiction tag, but the complexity and depth of the storytelling still managed to surprise me. The pacing of the writing never felt slow, and it was engaging the entire time. But the first half of the first book felt more like, let's follow Anja on his adventure to look for his spore. And then there was an incident that took place in the book that just reminds you that things aren't so hunky-dory in this world. And from that point on, things just kept getting worse progressively with no breaks. It felt a little bit like reading a novel version of Attack on Titan, with how humanity was forced to be secluded in their bases to avoid attacks or infections from xenogenics. And the transient nature of people's lives was also quite similar in the sense that people were there one day and then the next day they were just gone. That imminent sense of danger was constant, and it showed you how volatile people's lives were in the world the book is set in. I think this is a series that nearly everyone can enjoy. The romantic plot was understated and it was more heartfelt than it was explicit, so that makes it readable for a lot of ages. There was, however, quite a bit of the world that was explained using physics. I was a pretty decent student, if I do say so myself, but physics and I just never really got along. I understood that portion of what was being explained for the purpose of the book, but I cannot explain it to someone else if I wanted to. So you'll have to read the book to figure out that part for yourself. I got what I needed out of it while I was reading it, and the minute I was done reading the book, it just flew right over my head. And it's not like those parts of the book were necessarily hard to understand. They just required a lot more focus to process them. But overall, this was an amazing short series that I think anyone who is interested in the danmei genre should give a read. You can buy both the print and ebook versions from the Peach Flower House website or Amazon, and I'll put links for both options in the description. The series also has an audio drama and an ongoing manhwa adaptation for people who are interested in exploring the story in those versions. So that was a quick summary and review of what to expect from the series. If you're not familiar with it at all, I'll be talking about Anja and Lu Feng a little bit more, as well as some things that stood out to me in the series, starting with the world building and the overall plot. The world in the series was rich and the description was so vivid. I was able to picture every portion of the story in my head, almost like I was right there. You had the abyss, which was home to the xenogenics, and an area that had also been affected by cosmic radiation. So even the xenogenics that humans were fighting against were also trying to survive. The weak amongst them were falling prey to the strong and being devoured, and the strong kept trying to get stronger, and they were also doing their best to guarantee their survival in that world. There were creatures who were a mishmash of a bunch of different xenogenics, and all I was thinking when I was reading some of their descriptions was, dang, talk about a world you do not want to transmigrate into. Reality was very depressing for everyone in that story. It was hopeless. Humans were just existing and everyone was doing their best to survive. And in contrast to the Abyss, where it was survival of the fittest and more of an every man for himself kind of mentality, in the human basis, humans had formed large communities over time that served very specific functions, like the trial courts and its judges, the research scientists of the lighthouse, and the women and children of a place known as the Garden of Eden that served as a hub for procreation. No one existed for their individual desires. There was no room to harbor or pursue anything of that nature, and everyone just existed to ensure the survival of humanity. So in that way, humans had lost what made them human, and in a sense, they were now operating on an animalistic basis, similar to the xenogenics in the Abyss. It was a story that constantly challenged what it means to truly live in very subtle ways. The loss of existentialism wasn't like right in your face. It slowly made itself known and dug in deep in a way that left a lasting impact. It also felt a lot like humanity was fighting against something they didn't understand, but it's not like they could just give up and die. They still had to fight with their minimal understanding of the world around them. They didn't really understand the mutation of xenogenics, but they did what they could with the information they had. However, as the book progressed, there were bits of revelations here and there that gave a little bit of information to make them feel like the answer to what plagued their world was within their reach, but it really wasn't. The more they found out, the more their situation looked hopeless. And there's a portion of the book that mentions that as well. It goes, humans' genes are too weak, so they are unable to perceive the changes currently happening in the world. We will all die. All work was futile. It only proves the insignificance and powerlessness of humankind. Humans weren't adapting quickly enough to process the changes of the world around them, and instead they were forced to fight in hopes that someday their situation would change and there would be hope for their survival. And there was no one who fought as hard as Lu Feng for the survival of humanity collectively. He was a character that stood out to me the most in the series. Initially, it was Anja because of much of the first book focused on him, but once you get to the second book, Lu Feng really starts to shine as a character. His character was one that was introduced as just this very cold, impersonal, and unfeeling person, but by the second book, I just wanted to hug him. His character was a very sadly misunderstood and lonely one due to the role he had to play in humanity's survival. His life as the Arbiter was a life of isolation. The responsibility of the role was already really heavy, but he seemed to take on a lot more because there were things that only he could do. And although that earned him the hatred and ire of many people, he was steadfast in his decision and choice to ensure everyone's survival. He had to be unwavering in his will, but one can also say that his fate of isolation was sealed the moment he was chosen for the role, because regardless of all the people he's able to save, the fact still remains that he has to take a lot of lives to keep other people safe. So even the ones that are thankful to be alive still harbor a lot of fear towards him, because they were aware that his gun could easily be pointed towards them one day. And for that reason, he was viewed with fear, contempt, hatred, and he just became this vessel that everyone could direct their negative emotions towards. And this is one of those situations that's not black or white, and you're able to see and understand both sides. But one side was a group of people and the other was just one man, or at least it was just one man, until a little mushroom loved and understood him in ways that even people of his own species failed to. There was a line repeated for the most part of the book that went, "For the sake of humanity," and Lu Feng's character, I feel like, truly embodied that phrase. He existed and fought for the sake of humanity, and his ability to make the choice to kill people who threatened the survival of humanity came across as indifference, and because no one really cared to understand him, you didn't really get to see his point of view until someone actually understood him and was curious enough to understand those things about him. It was during a conversation with Anja that readers got to see a part of that viewpoint. He said, "The source of the arbiter's beliefs was not indifference, but kindness. Kindness not to individuals, but to the fate of all humankind. If one were to steadfastly believe that humankind's interests take precedence over all else, they will not waver." So he took the approach of being indifferent to individual interests and prioritized the fate of all humankind, which was what was needed for humanity to survive as long as they did while Lu Feng was the arbiter. The book also mentions that the arbiter was doomed to one of two fates: either abandon your humanity and indiscriminately kill people without restraint, or maintain your clarity of mind and eventually fall into madness as a result of unbearable suffering. It's easy to see someone who has to make very difficult choices for the sake of many and just dismiss them as cold and unfeeling, but this perspective really broke my heart, even more so when he was convinced that the only feeling anyone could possibly or reasonably harbor towards him was hatred. And you can see his defenses slowly break down when someone genuinely understood him and showed him an expression that wasn't fear or contempt. And again, I will read out a part of the book that really drives home Lu Feng's emotional shift. In this part, Anja had fallen asleep next to him and he was remembering the first time they met, and he had to shoot the person Anja returned to the base with because he had gotten infected. I'll start right here where I have the star sticker. Part of his fingers showed from beneath the quilt, gently curled, but it was also a very relaxed demeanor. This is Anja sleeping. Not a single nerve was tensed up. As he slept here, without the slightest alertness or vigilance, it was like he was sleeping in a place he wholeheartedly trusted to be safe. He believed that in this place, nobody would harm him. Lu Feng suddenly recalled that day from 2 months earlier. That day was the first time they met. Anja looked into his eyes and said to him, he hadn't gotten wounded. He's talking about the man that he returned to the base with. He had long ago gotten accustomed to the sight of disputes and denials. We're back in Lu Feng's point of view. And interrogations and rage were things he had to encounter countless times every single day. But that was his first time seeing a pair of eyes like that. He did not ask questions, nor did he fail to understand. There was only grief. Yet within that grief was an innocent calm, as if so long as Lu Feng gave a reason, he would accept anything and forgive anything. He had never paid attention to anyone's pleas before, but that one time he lifted the white cloth covering the corpse to review that person's wound. And then the chapter ends with this line: a person's wavering starts from the first time their heart softens. This was the first time in the entire series that readers got a peek into Lu Feng's thoughts, and I found it very interesting that what made him waver was another person's understanding. It wasn't something that he was looking for, and his position as the arbiter also gave him the level of authority where people didn't usually question his decisions. So being faced with understanding stood out to him. He was rarely even provided the opportunity to be met with that in the first place because people didn't question him. And I think the reason why Anja was the one who could do that was because he had no familial or emotional attachments, and his innate inhumanity afforded him the ability to look at Lu Feng's actions and role as the arbiter through a very objective and neutral lens. It wasn't about what Lu Feng could do for him or to him. It was a matter of him understanding the role that Lu Feng played in the ecosystem of the human base, and looking at it from that perspective, he was able to understand that Lu Feng's role was one that was necessary. Ironically, the only person who understood Lu Feng was also what he existed to eliminate. The two of them started to develop a relationship that wasn't quite friendship, as one party thought he was being bullied, that one party being Anja. And it seemed like Lu Feng wasn't entirely convinced that Anja was human, so he was monitoring him. But something bloomed out of their weird relationship, and these two people who logically shouldn't see eye to eye because they're natural enemies fell in love with each other. Much of the book was written from Anja's point of view, and his neutral view of the world softened the blow of immense tragedy in the book. But there were so many parts of his interactions with Lu Feng and their unfortunate reality that just crushed my soul, chewed it up, and spat it out. I was bawling my eyes out uncontrollably at some point. I loved and enjoyed how we saw events through Anja's viewpoint. His view was unbiased, and that made the story all the more captivating. It had this tenderness to it while still maintaining the sadness of their very harsh reality. The only word I can think of to describe the experience is poignant. It's understated and not in your face, but regardless, it leaves a lasting impact. That was my takeaway from the series, and me trying to present all the things that stuck with me in a very condensed manner. I recommend the series, but if you do pick it up, be prepared for an emotional and thought-provoking read that will make you cry. And to wrap up the video, I want to briefly address the drama around the manhwa adaptation. I bought the books earlier in the year and did plan to read them eventually, but the manhwa was the ultimate deciding factor for me to read both books this month, and I've seen a bunch of people who felt the same way. So imagine my shock when I found out that the artist of the manhwa was receiving so much criticism regarding her art that she decided to stop creating the manhwa and was looking for someone else to continue the manhwa adaptation. Her art was being compared to fan art, the audio drama cover, and novel illustrations, and there were people saying that the character designs and scenery were not as good as what they were being compared against, which you saw some of the artist works that I used for the summary earlier in the video. And I'm just thinking, like, obviously all those things are not the same. They were created by different people, but is it really such a hard thing to appreciate someone's work without pitting it against someone else's? You really have to wonder what goes on in the minds of some people, because all I ever felt towards the manhwa was appreciation for how beautifully it was drawn. And now that I've read the books, the artist really did do a good job of bringing the story to life with her art. The character designs accurately depict what was written in the books, and it's pretty easy to switch from one to the other without feeling a disconnect between them. And that shows familiarity with the source material, but someone somewhere or multiple someones thought it was okay to just completely disregard all of that and provide destructive criticism that nobody asked for. We are now in this era with very privileged consumers who give unsolicited opinion. Everyone's a critique, and they're ruining some of this experience for other fans. You see the same thing happening with anime adaptations, and I'm pretty sure the Arha manhwa is facing something similar right now. The artist is getting changed again. I honestly wish it would just stop, but you can't really control the actions of other people. All you can do is react in a way that hopefully minimizes the negative impact of their actions. Fortunately, a lot of people banded around the artist for the Little Mushroom manhwa with supportive comments and to show how much they loved and appreciated her work. And I'd have totally understood it if she decided not to pick the manhwa back up again. But the last update I saw regarding the issue was that she was going to keep working on it. The issue was resolved, but it's one that I feel like should have never happened in the first place. But that was just a quick run through of what was happening with the manhwa. And today is one of those days where I actually remembered that I'm meant to be telling people to check out my other content and consider subscribing. So if you enjoyed watching this video, check out my other content and consider subscribing. Whatever day you find yourself watching this, make it a great one, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!